Think the Bible's talking donkey is just a fairy tale. Archaeology actually revealed Balaam was a real, terrifying pagan sorcerer, dominating the ancient Near Eastern world. Imagine hiring this legendary dark seer to annihilate your greatest enemies, only to watch his devastating ancient curses get completely hijacked by an unstoppable divine force. Far away in the arid land of Moab, King Balak stood atop his fortified palace walls. His anxious eyes surveyed a valley filled with absolute dread. Below him stretched an endless, terrifying sea of Israelite tents. This unstoppable nomad army had already crushed mighty nations and completely toppled legendary ancient kings. Now, they camped right at Moab's fragile border. If this massive horde marched forward, absolutely nothing in the natural world could ever hope to stop them. Moab's fierce warriors were historically strong. However, against a nation whose terrifying god had recently split the sea and completely shattered the Egyptian empire, swords failed. Balak needed supernatural warfare. He dispatched desperate messengers, riding swiftly through the harsh desert, carrying overflowing chests of silver, gleaming gold, and priceless royal gifts. Their urgent mission was to hire a dreaded man feared across all surrounding nations. This legendary prophet was Balaam, a master of ancient occult curses. It was widely believed throughout the region that whoever Balaam blessed achieved supreme power, and whoever this dark seer cursed was instantly brought to absolute ruin. Night shrouded the landscape when Balaam finally stepped outside. Flickering torchlight violently danced across the deeply weathered face of the ancient world's most infamous mystic. Before him stood the wealthy Moabite elite, their arms literally overflowing with heavy precious metals. Their persuasive voices flowed as smoothly as the finest merchant silk. "King Balak offers you unimaginable riches," they whispered. "Simply come and lay a devastating curse upon Israel, and our desperate king will reward you beyond measure." Balaam coldly replied to the eager men, "I can only speak what the divine realm commands. Rest here tonight, and tomorrow I will reveal the verdict." That very night, as the seer lay in his darkened chamber, an overwhelming, terrifying divine presence completely filled the heavy air of his secluded home. The sovereign voice of the Lord suddenly shattered the silence. "Do not travel with them. You are strictly forbidden to curse these divinely protected, blessed people." The divine mandate was unmistakably clear. As morning broke, Balaam stood firmly before the anxious messengers, declaring that the God of Israel blocked his journey. He ordered them to return to their desperate king immediately. "The Lord has absolutely refused to let me travel and perform this dark ritual for you." The exhausted messengers eventually returned to King Balak bearing Balaam's frustrating refusal. But this desperate monarch was definitely not a man who ever easily accepted defeat. He swiftly dispatched an even larger delegation of high-ranking officials. These prestigious noblemen brought significantly greater treasures, effectively transforming a simple request into an absolute royal summons. The prominent messengers arrived and urgently pleaded with him, "Let absolutely nothing keep you from coming, for the desperate king will reward you with unparalleled greatness. Simply name your desired price, and it shall be yours." But Balaam firmly answered that even a palace overflowing with gold could not buy his obedience. "I simply cannot go beyond what the Lord strictly commands." Yet, that very night, the ambitious prophet secretly asked the divine presence for permission once again. This time, the divine response was completely different. God commanded him to go with them, but warned he must strictly speak only the specific words given. So, just before the pale dawn broke, Balaam eagerly saddled his trusted donkey and set out on the fateful desert road toward the kingdom of Moab. He remained completely unaware that the treacherous journey ahead would violently test far more than just his basic obedience to the terrifying ancient divine will. The bright morning sun blazed intensely over the parched, dry earth, and the dusty road ahead initially seemed completely clear and devoid of any immediate danger. Then suddenly, the frightened donkey abruptly stopped moving. Balaam angrily frowned and violently pulled the heavy leather reins, shouting at the stubborn animal to move forward immediately. The loyal animal completely refused to budge, because it clearly saw what the famous prophet could not see standing directly before them on the narrow path, completely unseen to blind human eyes. A terrifying divine warrior stood blocking the way. It was a towering supernatural angel with a sword drawn perfectly ready for battle. Blinded by his sudden rage, Balaam violently struck the helpless donkey once, twice, and then a third time, desperate to force the animal to keep moving. "Move, you useless, stubborn beast," he aggressively shouted, raising his heavy wooden staff, fully prepared to strike the terrified animal yet again in his blinding fury. Then, just as he was preparing to strike another heavy blow, the miracle occurred. The beaten donkey suddenly opened its mouth and spoke with human words. "What exactly have I done to you that you have brutally beaten me these 3 separate times?" The shocking words completely froze Balaam mid-swing in utter disbelief. Instead of recoiling in absolute shock at this supernatural event, the enraged seer answered the talking animal without even thinking about the absolute absurdity of it. "Because you have humiliated me and made me look foolish. If I only had a sharp sword in my hands right now, I would slaughter you." The loyal donkey's voice miraculously remained entirely calm. "Have I ever behaved like this toward you before, in all the long years I have served you?" The angry prophet briefly hesitated as the shocking realization finally began to settle in his mind. "No," he quietly admitted, "you have never done this before." In that exact moment, Balaam's spiritual eyes were forcibly opened. He finally saw the terrifying angel of the Lord standing directly in his path with a drawn sword. The divine warrior radiated a fierce, overwhelming presence that literally made the surrounding dry earth tremble violently. The once proud sorcerer instantly collapsed down onto his knees. His mortal heart pounded in absolute terror as the imposing angel spoke. "Why have you brutally beaten your faithful donkey 3 times on this dusty road? I personally stood here, blocking your way because your reckless path is fundamentally displeasing and highly rebellious before my holy presence in this crucial divine mission. If your perceptive donkey had not quickly turned aside, I would have certainly struck you down dead where you stand, while mercifully sparing her innocent life." The deeply humbled prophet bowed even lower into the dusty dirt. "I have grievously sinned. If my journey displeases you, I will immediately turn back home." But the fierce angel's intimidating gaze did not soften at all. "Go with them, but you will strictly speak only the exact words I give you." Balaam rose very slowly from the dirt, his weak limbs violently shaking. His legendary pride was completely shattered as the long road to Moab stretched ahead. He finally arrived in the kingdom of Moab. Before him stood the massive city gates, flanked by towering banners proudly bearing the royal sigil of King Balak. A grand royal procession suddenly emerged, an impressive line of armed chariots, and fierce warriors proudly escorting the desperate king himself to greet the famous prophet. Balak stepped forward eagerly. "At last, you have arrived. Did you seriously doubt my messengers? I can easily make you the wealthiest man alive today." But Balaam's tired eyes remained distant, his heavy thoughts still completely consumed by the terrifying weight of his recent divine encounter on the desert road. "I have finally come," he whispered, "but you must clearly understand this harsh reality. I possess absolute power to speak only what the Lord commands." The impatient king immediately replied, "Then let us waste no more precious time. The invading people you must urgently curse are waiting just below us." As nightfall approached, Balak led Balaam up to Bamoth Baal, a highly sacred ancient pagan hill directly overlooking the vast, terrifying Israelite camp spreading below. Ritual fires burned intensely in great stone braziers. The thick, metallic scent of fresh animal sacrifice completely filled the heavy air of the high place. "Look down there," the king commanded. "These invading people are too numerous to even count, swarming like destructive locusts across my land. Curse them now." Balaam stepped forward slowly, but instead of aggressively lifting his voice to deliver the expected dark pagan curse, he simply turned his weathered face toward the heavens. The sovereign Lord spoke clearly to him. Then he finally opened his mouth, and instead of a devastating curse, a beautiful divine blessing poured forth. I behold a unique people, completely set apart, remarkably mighty and divinely blessed. Who could ever possibly count the massive sprawling dust of wandering Jacob? King Balak's fists tightly clenched, his jaw visibly tightened in absolute rage, and he turned sharply toward the seer. "What on earth are you doing? I explicitly brought you here to completely curse my deadly enemies, not to shower them with powerful divine blessings." Balaam's calm voice did not waver. "Must I not speak exactly what the Lord commands?" The king's angry face darkened significantly. "Come, we will eagerly try again in another sacred place. Perhaps their unpredictable God will finally permit a devastating curse there." Balak quickly led him to another elevated location called Pisgah, under the starlit sky. Ancient stone altars proudly stood against the darkening horizon. The pagan priests hurriedly prepared 7 fresh animal sacrifices, hoping to successfully manipulate the divine will. Balaam stood quietly before the bloody offerings, his eyes completely closed, patiently waiting. Once again, when he opened his mouth, a powerful divine blessing emerged. God is definitely not a mortal man that he should ever lie. "Behold, I have received a strict command to bless, and I cannot change it." Balak's flushed face violently twisted in absolute fury, his shaking hands quickly balling into tight fists. "I have had enough of this utter prophetic nonsense. If you stubbornly refuse to curse these invaders, then at least absolutely do not bless them." The desperate king's limited patience was now completely gone. He forcefully seized Balaam's arm, aggressively dragging him to yet another prominent high place called Peor, which dangerously overlooked the vast, untamed wilderness below them. It was his absolute last desperate hope. "Surely here you can finally curse them," Balak stubbornly insisted, his trembling voice a chaotic mixture of desperation. Once again, Balaam prepared the altars, but this time he entirely refused to seek out pagan omens as he had traditionally done in the past. Instead, he purposefully fixed his gaze upon the wilderness. And as he stared at Israel, the overwhelming Spirit of God powerfully came upon the prophet. "How incredibly lovely are your sprawling tents, O Jacob, your peaceful dwellings, O Israel. They look like lush, green gardens planted perfectly beside a river. The sovereign Lord himself is undoubtedly dwelling with them." King Balak violently staggered back, his mouth repeatedly opening and closing, but absolutely no words came. His burning rage could no longer be contained. He furiously turned on Balaam, his voice reduced to a bitter growl. "This is absolute treacherous betrayal. I urgently called you to completely curse my enemies, and 3 separate times you have blessed them instead. Leave my kingdom immediately, you useless fool. I would have certainly made you incredibly rich, but your stubborn Lord has unfortunately kept you from receiving my immense, world-changing royal rewards this very night." Balaam did not flinch at the furious king's hollow threats. "I explicitly told you initially that I could not ever go beyond the Lord's word." Then Balaam turned his weathered face directly toward the distant horizon. With the divine spirit upon him, he spoke one absolute final, earth-shattering ancient prophecy. "I see him, but not right here and now. I clearly perceive him, but far into the distant future. A bright star will ultimately rise. This majestic star will gloriously rise out of Jacob, and a powerful, eternal scepter will ultimately emerge from the blessed, unstoppable nation of ancient Israel."